What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Salty Runback, here to be your weekly intake of North American League of Legends. It's been a while. It's been a while since we've been confined to these boxes. Almost a month since we last talked to Sam. Thank you all for your support on the podcast.
Claustrophobic all of a sudden.
Have had a lot of really solid support on our last couple of episodes, and so that means a lot. Thank you very much for that. It is officially off season now, as we have the World Finals coming up this Saturday, but of course that does not mean that the conversations stop, as we have some format announcements to go over, as well as a conversation with a very special member of the community who's putting on a pretty cool event. That's right, we're going to be talking with Parth from SIDO, who is, of course, currently in charge of running the SIDO Combine. My name is Grapes, joined alongside Hawk. Hawk, how are you doing today?
Grapes, I'm doing all right. I've actually been kind of tired today, but it's Halloween. Happy Halloween, everyone out there. We did not wear costumes, thank God for this. Some people might have seen on Twitter I was dressed as a bunny last week. I cannot confirm nor deny whether or not that actually happened. And I was given
by the time the episode comes out, it will be not Halloween, so that's why we're not wearing costumes today.
True. Good. And it's definitely not because I don't own literally like any decent costume pieces in Los Angeles, and I'm really broke. So, yeah. No, but fun time of year. It's most certainly in the off season at this point. There's not been too much going on, but there's been enough to where we felt it was necessary to at least make an episode to kind of check back in with the space.
Yeah, when you start getting those sheep tweeting about everything going on, those showing up on your timeline, that's when you know that something. It's truly the off season. So we're going to talk about some of that stuff, as well as some announcements that were put out by Riot officially. In terms of the schedule, not too sure just yet. We'll throw out an episode every once in a while, whenever any news breaks. With our luck, as soon as we post this episode, there's going to be like a huge blockbuster announcement.
If there's more LTA news, because we strategically waited. Guys, we did the good thing of waiting for the news to drop before recording. If more news drops, I'm going to be very upset.
Just our luck. There's gonna be news that drops tomorrow as soon as we post the
exactly.
episode. So.
I feel like us recording prompts news drops. Like anytime we're like, Grapes, it's kind of a boring week, man. Like, do we even want to record? Like, we'll record like a kind of whatever episode, and then immediately after something fun happens, it's like, fuck. All right.
All right. Well, as soon as that news does come out, whether it's tomorrow or next week or next month, we'll be right here talking all about it. Hopefully have some other cool interviews set up and another part 2 set up as we fully prepare ourselves for the Americas in 2025. So without further ado, let's get into our headlines. Let's start a little bit retrospectively as we discuss the World Championships, which are about to conclude this weekend. Real quick question before we begin, BLG or T1?
T1. They've looked better. Bin can gap, but I have T1 301.
Yeah, that moment, that last team fight where Faker dies and then everyone else comes around, I think it's like that was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles meme come to life on screen. So I'm T1 all the way. I voted for them in my pick'ems last week, but not like the overall
This one's
winner,
for Reckless.
Yeah. This one's for Reckless. We're going to get Reckless's ring. Speaking of that World Championship, of course, T1 did beat Gen G, who only advanced to the semifinals because of a narrow victory
they got
to
kind of lucky.
FlyQuest, our number 1 seed from North America. Oh, man, was that a fun morning on that Sunday morning, watching FlyQuest, our North American seed, go toe-to-toe with what many consider to be the best in the world. And, of course, they almost didn't make it, as well as they had to fight in that 2-2 match to get into the quarterfinals against Team Liquid, who was our second seed from North America. So despite a slow start from our NA teams with 100 Thieves, ended up going all right for North America. What's your takeaways from this? Is there a message that the performance of FlyQuest and Team Liquid's performance had on North American League of Legends as a whole?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because obviously I'm very happy and everything, right? Like, yeah, that's fucking awesome. But I honestly don't have, I think, as much of a takeaway as a lot of people, because there's a lot of normies being like, oh my God, like, NA talent, apparently they're actually good. It's like, yeah, we fucking know. But I do still think, like, I think what FlyQuest and Team Liquid proved is a theorem that's been proven many times, and yet for some reason seems to be foreign, which is there's actually two. One is that I think GMs and people that talk about talent in general are way too obsessed with trying to find the absolute five pinnacle of mechanical skill players while ignoring literally every other part that makes a good league player, like mental, work ethic, communication, teamwork, all those kind of things. I think a big part of this FlyQuest and this Team Liquid roster is they seem to really come together as five. And that's very important. Like, this is going to sound crazy. Yeah, we've always been a little bit hands gapped by China and Korea. Like sometimes a lot of bit hands gapped by China and Korea. But like, I think it's cope to think that most of the time when we've lost in the past is because we're just individually worse than them. No, it's just because we're worse at the fucking game than them. We're worse teams than them, you know? And FlyQuest and Team Liquid, I think, were teams that as five were able to challenge the best. I mean, there was a time when I think Team Liquid had some of the best macro in the world, and then, oh my god, FlyQuest had to adapt to that to beat them, right? And that's how you create success. And then takeaway number two for me is like the whole, like, yeah, just play your game. Like, I think FlyQuest is going to be the new misfits in the eyes of many. That's a team I still hold in very high regard, and I'm hoping that they've inspired people. Obviously, Masu and Busio, I think, were the two best players on their team. I thought they were some of the finest players in their roles at the World Championship. Even still, I thought they had a phenomenal tournament. So yeah, I mean, it's a great time to be an NA fan, but at the same time, I don't think there's some grand message to take away for people that have been paying attention to NA Developmental League.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is that North America's got some pretty good bot lanes. That was my takeaway. You know, even Yan and Core in the games that they won, and even in some of the games that they lost, put up some really solid performances on their own. And then of course Masu and Busio have to be mentioned in that space as well. Masu with some game-defying team fights in some of the FlyQuest wins around the Baron and things like that. Of course, Busio a big part of that as well. An interesting caveat with these two teams as well is they both had mid laners that started the season in the NACL with their academy/sister teams, and then were moved into the starting LCS role sometime in the summer split. For APA, it was about halfway through in 23. For Quad, it was at the start of the summer in 2024. And I think that proves that not every roster is going to be perfect, but having development pieces, having pieces below in that secondary squad can also help you. FlyQuest probably wouldn't have picked up Quad if they had
never.
to evaluate the risk of just having him like sit around as a sub. Having him a part of the Challengers team where he won the NACL and eventually got promoted definitely allowed FlyQuest to have that success.
It's an objective fact, I think, that Team Liquid and FlyQuest did what they did this year for two reasons. One was their developmental ecosystem, right? They were able to develop these players in their systems. Two was great coaching. I think Spawn deserves like the Presidential Medal of Freedom for what he did for the LCS this year because he made Team Liquid into that team. And then I know I'm giving Team Liquid a lot of credit for FlyQuest success, I guess, but I do think Team Liquid's prowess throughout so much of the season, I don't think if that doesn't happen, I don't think FlyQuest ever does what they then did at this World Championship. Does that make sense? I think they together elevated the level of play in the region. And so it's coaching, it's developmental scenes, it's the players too that actually wanted it and were willing to work for it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, obviously, Team Liquid, their two wins were against, Pain Gaming and GAM, right? But they had some pretty good showings against some of the LPL teams as well. And, you can't forget about their MSI showing where they nearly took down a team like T1.
I think
so it's like Team Liquid, had their moment in the spring. FlyQuest had their moment in the summer. But overall, the fact that they were both playing in that 2-2 match, and honestly, in my opinion, like if the draw ended up a different way, I think both of them could have made it into the quarterfinals if things ended up in a different way.
I think it's fair to say that Team Liquid was maybe a little bit disappointing, but I don't think they were an embarrassment. Right? Some people were really like, oh man, this is your best team, like whatever. FlyQuest ended up kind of making everyone forget about that, but it's they kind of fell off at the end of the year, but I think Team Liquid still had a great year, and I think they can be happy.
Definitely. This is what's good about, rooting for a team that, or a region or a team that, like, you're not expecting to win the whole thing. You're just expecting to put up a solid fight and to put up a good performance. I think even though, obviously, FlyQuest and Team Liquid are not in the World Finals, I think we can still be happy about the way that things finished out for them and remain hopeful despite the fact that we might be losing some international slots, for 2025 and beyond. Speaking of, let's talk about, one of our NACL teams that is actually not going to be an NACL team for a while, or for the time being, as it was announced in the Riot announcement that came out today, as we are recording this, yesterday as you are hearing this, that Disguised will be joining the now LTA League of the Americas, which, first of all, not the biggest fan of the name. I think LCA League of Legends Championships of America probably is a little bit better, but I digress. DSG going to be the guest slot for 2025. Of course, they will still have to enter the promotion tournament to play against the best teams in Tier 2, but I think this was potentially a move that some of us were expecting. Do you like it, or do you wish it was someone else?
Yeah. First of all, just to talk about the LTA stuff really quick, we'll talk about that more in depth in our next headline, as you can see in the sidebar. But as far as just the branding, like, I understand why they had to rebrand, but I think the thing about rebrands is if you're going to rebrand something, you have to make sure that in the eyes of the consumer, it's like a clear upgrade. And like LTA is just like, okay, like the logo's like fine. It's not the iconic LCS like parallelogram or whatever, but I don't know. It's fine. But regardless, DSG into the professional level, Grapes, that is not just fine. This is the obvious best choice. People had been talking about Disguised going to the guest slot ever since the concept of the guest slot was introduced. And all of the insiders were telling me it wasn't going to be them. It's not going to be them. It's going to be someone else. It's not going to be Disguised. And I'm just sitting here being like, but why though? You know what I mean? The only explanation could have been if Disguised Toast closes up shop with Disguised entirely, which I think would have been valid, right? But like that was the only explanation. I'm really glad that it's Disguised. It's a team that, at the very least, will bring eyes to the league, should hopefully do right by their players because, it's riding on the reputation of someone like Disguised Toast. It's probably going to feel like more of a fan-connected organization as well. And they're probably going to be competitive, I would hope, even if they're the worst team in the league, I don't really give a damn. I'm just happy that they're here. Like, this is the obvious brand to add. Nobody else in the NACL previously would have had this kind of power. And I even think another influencer team like Just Moist or whatever, or Moist Esports, I don't know why I keep saying Just Moist. Moist Esports could have, yes, they would bring a lot of fans, but I think Disguise has already put those roots in the League of Legends space. So I think this is the choice. And I mean, I have literally nothing else to say. Good. This is one of the only times I feel like I can just give 2 thumbs up to something that's happened in league news in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations to this guys. I think it's awesome that they're going to get a chance in the league. I think the goal that this org probably had when they started their journey in League of Legends is that eventually they could probably is that they were hoping that they could eventually get their way into the tier 1 ecosystem, and I believe that it ends up happening here, at least in a in some capacity. Obviously it's not a full slot. They'll have to go defend their spot in the promotion tournament regardless of what place they end up becoming, but I think it's a really cool way for them to be rewarded for what they put into the space. DSG with their watch party, Toast with his watch parties, driving more viewership to the space, specifically in the year that they won it all. And then, of course, hopefully incentivizing some other influencers to do the same, because that spot is up for grabs. And now if you are a team that wants to try to do what Disguise is doing, whether you are an influencer-led team or just another esports team in general, hopefully that inspires people like that to go back to the roots of the dreams of 5 players in an org dreaming of making it onto the big stage. Like, that can happen now for these guys, and so I think it's good for both of those reasons.
And going off that too, the last thing I want to say regarding Disguised is I think this would be risky, but how baller would it be if they stake their brand on being like NA's team, America's team, and they go full NA talent, and they...
I don't know if you saw, but that's not happening.
Wait, what?
They already signed Abadaga after
What?
their
I
first
didn't see
announcement.
that.
So they've gone full LCS. Hawk's gone, but yeah, Sheep reported that Abadaga was going to be their
Toast,
first
if
signing.
you're watching this, if this makes it onto your stream to react to, like one of our other podcast clips did, shame on you, motherfucker. I mean, look, I want them to win and I want them to do well, but also Abadaga, like, get the fuck out of here, bro. At least sign Faker. I mean, oh.
I know if it was like Chovy coming into sign, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
And I get it. I get it because they don't want to lose their spot. The incentive is to not lose their spot. But like, if they could go full NA talent, you know, fucking full like Surdy, like it doesn't even need to be dev talent, right? But just native NA players. They could be LCS veterans. I don't really give a damn. Like Surdy Blabber, like I don't know. That'd be fucking hype, right?
Around, right? Like he's somewhere.
What's up?
Palafox is probably
looking
for a job
Surdy,
somewhere.
Blabber, Palafox, Lens.
All that to say, it's it's
a
little bit
so
funny.
Cool. That would have been
it's
such
a
good
little
branding.
bit funny that after
everyone would have loved them.
After 3 straight splits of being like the NA talent team, they had the same mid laner for 3 straight splits in Young, who had a bit of an up and down 2024, but in my opinion is still somebody that is going to be a fun player to look out for in the future. Just immediately going to Abadaga is kind of funny. You know what LC? Do you remember what LEC team he was on last year?
He was even in the LEC.
Boom! That's right. He was on K Core Blue in the EU Masters.
Oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, I don't think he was.
So not even in the LEC.
I didn't not pay attention to that much.
So hey, we are prioritizing tier 2 talent, just not from our region, and also somebody who's already been in the LCS and the LEC.
Dude, he was so fucking mid when he played for 100. Like, Abadaga is a crazy pickup.
Hey, okay, we'll see what the rest of the team ends up looking like, but for now, you're on thin ice right now, Toast.
Yeah.
We'll say in terms of the roster building, I hope the content and everything. I'm sure that'll work out.
This roster about to be burnt toast if they pick up another dog shit import like that.
All right. Well, let's move on to talk about the Americas as an entirety because we still don't know too much about a lot of the rosters. But what we do know is that the format is going to look a little bit different. 3 splits, and that was specified a little bit further in that announcement that came out on Thursday. The first split is going to be a fearless best-of-3 GSL stage that will mold into a cross-region international best-of-3 into a best-of-5 tournament single elimination, with the winners of that, of course, going to that international event in the end of Split 1. Split 2 will look pretty similar to a regular split of what you have now known as the LCS for the last couple of years, with a double round robin best-of-1 into a playoff bracket. And then, of course, Split 3 is going to look a little bit different with, I forget what exactly they called it, but it's like the choose your fighter thing.
Yeah, it's pick and play format.
Yeah, pick and play. It's like a modified Swiss format where, not Swiss, but like kind of the opposite of Swiss, where like the 0-1 teams play against the 1-0 teams at the end.
It's fuck you in particular, Swiss.
Yeah. So the lower seeds get to choose which higher seed they want to play against in the regular season, and then the roles are reversed once we get into the playoffs with, of course, that final LTA championship. Both crowning a champion as well as figuring out which 3 teams, one from each conference and then one regardless of conference, will make it to Worlds at the end of the season. Overall, just because I know that we're an NA developmental podcast, but big changes to North America as a whole. What do you think?
And remember, speaking of NA dev, there's no tier 2 for the first split, which is a bummer, man. Okay. There's a lot to unpack here. One is that the LTA championship, I think, is very strategically only the thing won at the end of Split 3, which signals to me that they're only going to have... Well, actually, now I'm not sure. It seems like, okay, in the announcement, they said that the Split 1 championships would be played in Sao Paulo, and then the Split 3 championships would be played in North America. But I'm wondering if the Split 1 championship is just going to be played in the studio in Sao Paulo and then at LCS Studio next year, because the only thing called the LTA championship and like with a big trophy is Split 3. So I'm wondering if that's going to be the only big stadium roadshow of the year. That's like sort of one thing to talk about. I'll leave it there because I have like a lot of different topics I want to bounce around to, and I don't want to like just say a bunch of stuff. So, Grapes, do you have any thoughts on that specifically? That's kind of a small thing, but
That's actually not something that I thought about necessarily, but I would be a little bit concerned in that regard because it would mean that we'd go from having 2 road shows a year to 1 road show a year to potentially now, if you're just
to
a North
half a road
American
show a
fan,
year.
1 road show every 2 years, and of course the other one being held in the LCS studios. Wouldn't be the best thing, at least for driving the fan engagement. Of course, we have to think about profits and economics and all of that
ideal.
stuff. But it would be a little bit unfortunate. And I don't remember if they officially announced like, how much of it's going to be, in person or not, because that's a best of 5. That's an 8-team single elimination bracket. Like that's gonna take more than a couple of days. That's gonna be probably like a week long, 2-week long endeavor.
Yeah. So we'll see. I just kind of thought I'd throw that out in the universe and maybe make some people upset with that. Okay. Cool things. Split 1 is Fearless Draft. We've talked a lot about Fearless here. I think we're generally fans of Fearless. I know the community at large is a little bit divided. I am personally in the camp that entertainment always trumps this ideal of like game quality, because I also think that's kind of fake. Like, yes, there is an extent where games are so shit you don't want to watch them, but I don't think we're remotely close to that. And I think you can artificially increase entertainment quality disproportionate to game quality, I suppose. So I'm a fan of Fearless. I'm really excited for them to test it out. I'm excited that seemingly the first split is going to matter more for LTA than it does for example, LCK, where they're kind of like, XD, this is fake as fuck. So I'm excited about that. I think domestic splits need to matter. Interestingly, that is a single elimination bracket at the beginning into a double elimination bracket at the end. I thought that was an interesting choice. I understand why, because you don't want to just have a team be a one and done in the first split bracket. Like, that would be fucking terrible. But like when the regions actually merge, it just becomes single elim.
Yeah.
Which drastically removes potential for like multiple cross region matchups.
I think it's kind of like, it's I mean, if you think about it, right? It's 16 total teams. GSL stage. It's a GSL format. The double elimination groups is it's a GSL format. This is the same format as like an NACLQ, where you have 4 groups of 4 teams playing, and then they go into a single elimination bracket. So that's the format that they are trying to emulate here.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and it's I like the idea of Fearless, specifically in this first split. I have come to realize and come to appreciate the nature of having non-Fearless best of 5 series, and I think that those have become super interesting because of picks that become meta-defining and how you have to start to draft around them and stuff, specifically from watching the World Championships and watching a team like FlyQuest, who had so much unique stuff that they were able to throw out there that forced Gen G to have to respond to them. And so I like the idea of having, some tournaments be Fearless and some tournaments, specifically Worlds, remaining not Fearless. And
That's
I think
a good
that
point.
having this
I
first
feel like
split makes a lot of sense.
the value of Fearless increases the more boring a team normally is. But for example, imagine if like Inspired could only play Nunu once against Gen G. So he pulls it out. It's like, oh, fuck, it's Nunu. Okay, we don't have to worry about that anymore. Like, take the loss on the chin.
Then you don't have to think about it for the rest of the draft as well if you're Gen G and you're like, we weren't expecting that, but it's okay because we're not going to have to worry about it anymore.
You need Fearless for the boring teams and then non-Fearless for the fun teams that are cool.
Yeah. I like how this works out. It is interesting that only Split 1 and 3 have that cross-regional play. It seems like Split 2, they're just going to crown one winner from each conference, send them both to MSI.
Split 2, I'm not going to lie, looks kind of boring. Like, it's just an LCS split.
It's just an LCS split, which
is fine.
Fair. It was fine, but I think that having the first and the third at the end will maybe keep it a little bit more fresh.
To keep things brief, my thoughts on the third split, I don't really have them because this is definitely not something we've really seen before. Other than that, like, I'm generally amused that all 3 regions that have announced their formats so far are sort of being like, yeah, we're just going to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they're doing with formats right now. I'm okay with it. I appreciate that we're trying different stuff. I'm intrigued. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think if as long as we content the shit out of the picking the higher team, picking which
Yes,
team,
yes, yes, yes,
that will
yes.
make it good. If it's like just kind of a behind closed doors kind of situation, probably not as good.
Yeah.
So,
The last thing I want to say is
a lot of potential.
I'm hoping for tier 2 to talk a little bit more about tier 2. I think my one worry is that tier 2 is not going to look like the same landscape as tier 1 like at all. You know what I mean? Like I think tier 2 and tier 1 seem like they're going to be so separated now. And there's also only one promotion per year was what they said. Disguised only has to defend their spot at the end of 2025. So it seems like the gap between the two leagues, despite adding a promotion spot, almost feels like it's getting wider. So
It makes
that's
it
something, maybe a conversation that we have once more information comes out, but just kind of worth putting out there.
it makes it interesting as to how those spots are going to actually end up being finalized, and also like there's always so much flexibility with teams rosters will like switch dramatically from spring to summer split. That probably can't happen as much anymore, because if you're a roster that develop changes things up, maybe you won't have enough points to promote to make it to that promotion tournament, or it will make that first split completely obsolete. So I'm interested to see how Riot kind of handles that and makes both splits of NACL matter, of tier 2 matter, while also of course only maintaining one promotion tournament per year. So
Yeah. All right, Grapes. Let's rapid
yeah.
fire the last two headlines because my roommate is mad at me that I'm making us late for our dinner plans.
All right, let's
Shout
go
out
through
to
these
Josh
quick.
for hanging in there. All right.
Yeah. Speaking of one of our, most valuable players here in North America, one of our first true NA success stories in terms of player development, Jojopyun. Kind of have to put an 07 up to him. He didn't die. He's just going to Europe as Koi signs him for the 2025 season. And now, with less NA spots available, less world spots available for the LTA, do you think that Jojopyun is one of the first of many player exports, including prospects potentially from the NACL?
It's interesting. I think this is an anomaly, probably. I don't think this will necessarily be like the only one, but I do think this is an anomaly because Jojo specifically was offloaded because he was one of the last remaining if not the last remaining multi-million-dollar contract in the space, and none of the North American teams were willing to pay that, whereas LEC still kind of was. So like right now they're the region with money, but I also don't think LEC is going to go to other players that are not JoJo and offer them like more money than they could get in NA. Does that make sense? Like, so I think this is probably an anomaly, but maybe not the only one. We're definitely not the region with the money anymore. That could definitely change. Again, I choose to believe for every contraction, things will eventually get better. But yeah, that's just the reality right now.
I think that it will be interesting to see if that happens because, not to brag or anything, but NA has outperformed EU at Worlds the last couple of years.
We're kind of built like that.
Potentially now the more better region in a way. I don't know just yet. We've obviously
that's not even
seen...
a hot take. NA was 1,000% stronger
Definitely.
than EU this year because our domestic league was also way more entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch a single game of LEC, if we're gonna be honest, this year.
There's a reason for that. It was boring as fuck.
The ideas of like losing, obviously, like we just of course with Disguise brought in another European, but it seems like in a lot of the LFT posts we're seeing players put LFT NA/EU.
But I don't think that's new. I don't think
there.
that's new.
That's not super new, as I remember that was a conversation that was had over the last couple of years. But
yeah,
I do kind of agree with you that it's an anomaly. It's a bit of an anomaly. Especially because the EU Master scene is pretty large and pretty widespread. But I wouldn't be surprised if like super top prospects that aren't able to find a spot in NA, go to EU either on a top EU Masters team or into the LEC itself.
Yeah. Players should always do right by them, and they should always chase opportunities for them first and foremost. So I don't fault Jojopyun for doing it, and anybody else for looking for the same thing. Okay, Graves. Really quick question before we move on to the fifth headline. It was announced that Licorice is also going to be the starting top laner for Lions, which is the LLA representative in LTA. So and every team has like an additional quote unquote import slot where they can take any LTA player. Is this better or worse for NA talent? I just want like a yes or no.
I think it's better because there's more potential spots open. It's maybe worse for like Brazil and for LATAM.
Okay.
Is probably my take.
Okay. Because similarly, the NA teams could fill up more Brazilian or LATAM players. I don't know if they would. I'm just
I'd
kind
be
of curious.
surprised if that happens.
I would be surprised as
now.
well. But it's an interesting conversation. Maybe one that we have another time. Okay. I just thought that was kind of tangentially relevant. Final headline. Grapes, there's a combine going on. We're talking to the man in charge in just a couple minutes. Exports. That's the wrong word.
SIDO standouts is
SIDO
the question.
standouts. What the fuck did I write?
Yeah, so it's the first couple of weeks of the SIDO combine have Path to Pro combine, I should say, have been occurring. It's a really cool system where players, top performers from this part of the combine, will go to a boot camp in LA with 10 of those players, and then the top 5 of those will go get to boot camp in Korea. So pretty fun. There's a lot of NACL and NACL qualifier talent in this pool of players initially. As we have gone through this like first phase of the combine, Hawk, just want some of your thoughts on some players that you think have been impressing you so far.
Grapes, I have watched exactly like 4 games of the combine, and 3 of them were today. Kryra and Mixture had a phenomenal day today. They looked excellent. Kryra totally boomed Will 3 games in a row. I was very impressed by that. And similarly, Mixture made Cryogen look pretty goofy. So, yeah, shout out to those 2. I've been glazing them the entire year, and I will continue to do so until morale improves.
Yeah, what I love about this combine is that it's not just the NACL players like smashing. I mean, we have players like Scary Jerry and Zyko.
There's a lot of interesting different skill levels. There's like top tier 2 players, and then like random tier 3 players that are all like stepping up, you know?
Yeah, and we'll talk to Parth in a little bit. He explains kind of how that selection process actually occurred. But yeah, it's fun to see some of the players that weren't necessarily, have never played in the NACL go toe to toe and maybe even outperform some of these NACL players in specific games. With obviously over a larger sample size that might not end up being true. Some names that have stood out to me so far in terms of the games that I've specifically watched. I think Dark Wings has looked really good. In the mid lane, I think Kryra as well, as you say, also was looking solid. And I was really excited to see Sushi play, specifically because I think his laning has gotten a lot better, at least in this combine specifically, compared to what I've seen, what we saw from him with Lotus.
I was worried about him against Jerry, and he like kind of lost, but he lost gracefully. I gotta say though, Mix was fucking tearing it up. So that's my go right there. That's the number 1 support for NACL. Like should be in the league in 2025 for sure.
Yeah, big fan of him. I thought Cryogen in the games that I watched, I know that you had maybe some different.
He played
looks of
very
him.
badly today, but that's okay.
He played like
an
absolute psychopath in the games that I watched.
He was a psychopath in my games too. I want to be very clear.
Yeah, I think the flaws that people have said for him is that when he's ahead, he's like a monster. He's making plays left and right, but wasn't entirely sure of what to do. It was behind. Like same could be said about Dum Dum / Boruto, who is another player that I watched.
Grapes, maybe when you were casting, he was the sort of psychopath that's like Michael Myers, like gonna hunt you down and kill you. Mine was kind of like the self-immolation kind of psychopath. It was just not working.
Yeah, highs and lows of NA supports. That's kind of what we do here.
Yeah, and I respect that. Don't get me wrong. I still think Cryogen's a great player.
Yeah, I'm excited to see which names get confirmed for the combine in the coming days, as well as to see who gets those final spots moving forward. That's going to do it for our headlines. We're going to take it over to our interview with Parth to talk a little bit more about SIDO and what they've been doing. We are here with a man who has worn a lot of hats in the competitive esports scene and now is taking part in one of the biggest combines of the 2024 offseason. It's the founder of SIDO GG, Mr. Parth. Parth, thank you so much for talking with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited for this call.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Parth, it's really cool to have you both on the show and then also really getting into the developmental space because you are someone that has been in the scene for a while as well. Like you bring so much experience to the table. You've been a part of TSM, the highs, the lows, everything. I mean, before we kind of get into all of like the combine stuff, developmental, just I guess tell us a little bit. Maybe for friends of the show, you've been around for so long, they might not even know some of the exploits you've gotten up to. Tell us a little bit more about your career, some of your favorite memories, stuff like that. Anything.
Yeah, so I mean, I was with TSM from 2015 through end of 2021. Um, I started off as an online analyst, worked with them through that year, started head coaching them in 2016 for a few years, and then I kind of ran the entire program for the years afterward. Got to do a lot of cool things. Obviously, being a coach, being on stage, playing in crazy arenas, getting to shake Faker and Koma's hands, like those are probably one of my favorite memories. On the back end, I'm always someone who likes doing new things, and so we were the first team to kind of introduce everything from like uh, proper diet, sports psychologists, academy programs, scouting ground, like our own internal scouting grounds throughout, you know, when I worked there. And so there was a lot of things that I learned during my time that I got the opportunity to like experiment with. And yeah, it's part of those experiences is what kind of led me and inspired what I'm doing right now at SIDO.
Yeah, like 17-year-old me is like freaking out right now because I remember I used to watch every single episode of TSM Legends, and you'd
Oh,
always like
oh
be
no.
hanging out with Bjergsen, having those tough conversations in 2021, and things like that. But I was an OG TSM fan from like since around when you joined actually in
Fun
2015. So
fact, when I was asked to coach in 2016, one of my deals with TSM was that I would be featured as little as possible on Legends.
it was
So
uh it was like, I mean, it's a different landscape nowadays. That was like the show. That was like the reality show that like people would tune into to watch the LCS or
yeah, you know when they
follow the
came up with
LCS.
players recently, like a few years ago,
Yeah.
I saw the trailers and I don't think I even watched the show because it was too close to reality. So
A lot of the, yeah.
That's
No, I honestly I felt
hilarious.
a little bit of that as well when I watched the first couple of
I
episodes. So
yeah,
I do just need to clear the air as well. Graves talking about how he's a OG TSM fan. I think I was an OG TSM hater because I was a Cloud9 fan back in the day. So like back like 2016, 2017. So
uh,
sorry, Parth. I was your biggest hater back then, but now it's
dude, don't
okay.
worry. I was a Cloud9 fan until I joined TSM, so all good.
All right, we'll take it.
well, Parth, now you're with you founded this organization SIDO.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of people probably have seen what you guys have been doing over the last couple of years with things like Game Changers and now with this combine. But just for some of us watching at home, would you be able to explain kind of the goals of creating this corporation like that, like SIDO, and what the goals are behind it and
Yeah.
what you guys are trying to achieve?
I mean, fundamentally, I knew after leaving TSM and taking some time off, I wanted to do something in competitive gaming. I still think that games can be the context through which, humans can push the boundaries of human potential and connect people around the world. Um, and I wanted to do something that was kind of built for the long term, right? I wanted to do projects that I felt like were important, but were kind of ignored in the space just because they either were hard to fund or because they didn't make sense or people didn't have the right expertise. And so for me, this project and this company was essentially my way of kind of picking and choosing what projects I wanted to work on, as long as it was, financially responsible for us to do so. And so I kind of have two sides of what SIDO does. One is the research side. I think analytics and health are a really crucial part of how competitive gaming is going to grow. And we're going to learn a lot about how, how things like communication and sleep and cognitive load and those things kind of impact our performance in gaming, but just in general, how we interact with the digital space. So that's one part of it. It's like an analytics and research side. Through that, we've actually developed a bunch of products that some LCS Academy teams and like League of Legends teams around the world use. Um, and through that, we kind of get data that supports our research. So it's kind of two pronged. On the other side, we kind of consult for a lot of people in the space. We've worked with Riot on Game Changers. We consult for collegiate programs like Maryville. We work with third-party groups who want to invest into gaming and work in competitive space. So for us, our model is essentially consult on projects that we love and make revenue through that. And all of the revenue kind of goes into our research to kind of pursue anything interesting that we want to do. So that's kind of SIDO in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. I feel like this is something that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Esports is not really seen at least to seemingly the level that you all are doing. If you know if you want to talk a little bit more about, like, I guess you talked about, some of the initiatives that you've done already, but
Mhm.
what do you feel like is the most important things, I guess, that SIDO's bringing to the table that was already missing from the space?
I mean, for the most part, we want to build things out that are going to help out in the long term, right? So I can kind of go on a lot of
We
examples,
definitely need
but
more of that.
yeah, but like the key one is this idea. If you look at traditional sports, right, the reason why they exist and they continue being multi-generational is because the number of players and spectators who exist in each ecosystem increases per year, right? Like there's few players and spectators going to leave, but they're kind of replaced by newer players and spectators who come into the space. And in order for esports and competitive games to be multi-generational, the same thing has to exist. The issue is traditional sports, it's very easy. There's like a clear value associated with playing traditional sports. There's like a health value. Competitive gaming hasn't formed that yet. If anything, most people believe that playing games is somewhat detrimental to your kind of health and well-being, if not neutral. What one thing about our research that's trying to prove is that we're trying to align a lot of health factors from sleep, communication, and just cognitive ability to performance in competitive games. Because if we can do that, then we can demonstrate clear value in people who play games, and the applications for the industry would be enormous at all levels. Because if I can go to a parent or if I can go to school and be like, hey, we can teach your kids the fundamentals of these games, and through this, they'll learn how to do all of these basic things that are going to prepare them for the digital world. It basically creates a large group of people who will now play games, and that will, be that'll be like the thing that changes the viewpoint of esports and tradition and competitive gaming for the future. So for me, that is kind of like the long term vision, and then part of that is just working on small projects to get us there.
Yeah, I love that point that you bring up about, the creating that positive, reputation behind esports and allowing that to happen because, people love to compare traditional sports and esports all the time. They try to parallel them, but I think a big part of the reason that esports hasn't necessarily found that same level of success just yet is that multi-generational nature that you're talking about. Like the MLB playoffs are going on right now. I get to watch the games with my dad and with my family, and we have grown up being baseball fans and things like that. We haven't had time yet for League of Legends to really take hold, at least
Yeah,
for most people, and so
and
creating that positive mindset around it and making this next generation of people want to have their children love esports and do that. I think those are really, really important initiatives to be pushing.
yeah, and people forget that esports, despite how much money and hype has been around it, and like now the crash, like people forget that esports is still incredibly young compared to other
Yeah.
traditional sports, right? Like we've only gone through one cycle. If you look at every traditional sports and their growth over a period of time, it happened over decades, and there were always like leagues that popped up that failed, that were replaced by new leagues that ran good businesses. Um, Everything from like the merchandising in sports retail industry to how the media work with them, like these were all they slowly evolved and started to work together until we now see traditional sports to where they are. And esports has gone through one hype and down cycle, and I think most people should just kind of think of that as like an isolated case, and look at more the long term view. Because if we look at where things were 10 years before to now, like we have still advanced so much. And if we look 10 years into the future, we're going to be significantly, like the entire ecosystem is going to be significantly more progressed. So there's a lot of factors that are kind of coming into play, like you mentioned, like watching things with your dad. The generation that I grew up with are now having kids, right? Who are now then going to be starting to play video games. With Olympics announcing that esports is going to be a category, that's going to kind of bolster a lot of local and state funding and potentially even collegiate programs who are looking to get into this. And so the ecosystem is slowly going to only grow for competitive games over the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. You talked a little bit about collegiate support. You've done a little bit of projects with collegiate teams, like you've mentioned in the past. I do want to dive a little bit more now into like specifically developmental League of Legends, right? Because we're talking about creating benefit for the long term. I feel like almost like player development is sort of like the midterm, right? It's sort of creating that next quote unquote player generation as far as midterm years are concerned. Always having the talent pool be there. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, your initiatives with collegiate teams and the value, I guess, you place on player development and where you see that, where you see the future of that going, I suppose.
Sure. So the issue of player development is very complicated, right? Because it's like who owns the burden for developing players for the professional ecosystem. The reason why I think right now it's kind of in a struggle period because I've spoken to a lot of players and who are up and coming and can potentially make the jump and invest into going pro. For them, they feel like the opportunity is almost all or nothing. Either they put in a lot of time and effort and the grind and they either make it to pro or they feel like a lot of that effort is wasted. And so the way around that is to create as much value for the players to be able to try at the levels below pro, whether that means they can potentially use their skills and play in collegiate and, earn a degree or get something else, or they're, financed in a different way, or they have other like job or career opportunities by being in the space in some capacity. So I think we need to I think we need to kind of take a step back in terms of player development and think about more, how do we provide value to new and up and coming players in this space? And also the other part of that is the reason why kind of this space is still new and emerging is because there aren't a lot of trained, experienced coaches and staff members who operate in this space, because that just comes with time, right? Like people who play and work in the professional space retire, and that's kind of becomes a place to go. And so the second part of that is, how do we now create opportunities for people who have the expertise at the professional level to come down and kind of use that expertise in now this space? And so once you kind of do both of those things, create value for new and up and coming players, and also create a pathway for people who have expertise at the professional level to come and build that space out, that's when we're going to create like a stable ecosystem. And so I feel like that is the thing that's the most missing, and those are the projects that I've kind of been working on in collegiate, helping them build our programs, helping develop coaches, training up new and up and coming managers, giving players kind of the opportunities to know like there are different pathways out there for them, so it doesn't feel like it's just all or nothing for them.
So just to make sure, like I'm following everything that you said, but we want to create intrinsic value both for up and coming players and then also players that are sort of moving out of the space from that professional level. And then it seems like, which something that Grapes and I have talked a lot about on this show, you feel that collegiate is one of the big solutions sort of to that puzzle.
Yeah, so collegiate offers a good solution because, and I've kind of been exploring this, and I hope it kind of goes more in this direction. I think collegiate has just a lot of value just from like the opportunities they can provide for the people there, just through even let's take an example of like gen ed coursework, right? Like a lot of schools have online courses, especially gen ed courses, that in theory anyone can take. So if you're a player or a coach or someone in the space and you want to leverage your either skill or your experience that you already have into coming to the space, or an up and coming player who's coming to the space, if you just have opportunities for some of those coursework while you're trying to either go pro, that already creates a lot of value in the space. And for colleges, it doesn't cost them very much to offer some of these resources. Now, obviously, that this is like just the bottom rung, right? Like obviously, colleges can offer a lot more than that in terms of like support and programs, and there's a lot of value they get out of it too. But I think that what they can provide is probably one of the most valuable resources. They just need to sync up with Riot on how to do it, and the professional scene, because once you kind of form that link, it's going to be a lot easier for the ecosystem in general. I don't know. I know I rambled a little bit, but I'm just kind of curious of what you think.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that we've talked about a
We've
lot
talked a
because
lot, especially at the
you know
end where you mentioned
being
like
a
syncing up with Riot. So yeah,
yeah, being like a a varsity esports program, costs very little in comparison in comparison to the annual budget of a university or something like that, compared
Yeah.
to just a team in the NACL that's trying to compete in that, or for instance. And so having all those resources, an in-person environment where the players can work together, live together, kind of be students together, as well as of course the fact that you're getting an education that could help you eventually down the line. I definitely think that collegiate should be a path that more people do look at. Obviously, like there's been schools like Maryville and SLU, or SLU in the past, I guess at this point, but other programs that are offering these big scholarships and things like that. And I hope that we end up seeing more of that. Especially now that in the past you talk about these opportunities for players. A lot of those were in previous years given by LCS organizations, via academy teams and things like that. Once franchising was enabled, now that of course is kind of going away and has been fading away for the last little bit. And so in terms of finding, spaces for real full like professional level, I would say like environments for these players to develop, I definitely think collegiate is a big
yeah.
area for that.
It's really interesting. We've talked so much about collegiate before, but I actually would love to pick your brain a tiny bit more, Parth, because a conversation that we've had is like I said, it's like that whole syncing up with Riot thing, where for whatever reason, we have not really gotten a reason, but we've speculated on this a lot and we've criticized this a lot of like, for Riot, collegiate has never been the answer for whatever reason, right? And I think as a result of that, it's with less incentive to start collegiate esports programs with specifically the world's leading esport being League of Legends, right? Like we've seen colleges not do that as much, and even some schools like SLU, like as not just esports is struggling, but just like the general economy and everything, when they look for things to cut, it's things like esports because they feel like it's not providing as much value as perhaps it could have when they initially invested 5 years ago, for example, right? But and it was so interesting. I actually just had this conversation with Cubby last night. We talked a little bit about like, oh, well, it makes sense because if it's not funding football, it's not worth it or whatever, right? But something that's been coming out about a lot of universities recently is like a lot of university athletics, unless you're one of the top Power 5 schools in the entire country, a lot of university athletics are actually losing money right now. But colleges are seen as, that place where I guess like that investment can be made. So I still think it should be, I guess, one of the answers. And it's interesting to me that, that I guess like there's these differing outlooks. I don't know. I just rambled a little bit too, but
well, let's kind of let's talk a little bit about what you just said, right?
Yeah.
Like for colleges, you talked about like athletic programs. The way I see forward for colleges, most colleges I've kind of talked to and consulted with fall within one of three buckets. Because funding for esports doesn't necessarily have to come out of athletics.
True.
And in some cases, it's even easier for it to not. Obviously, athletics is one. And the purpose of athletics is, you're going to go out, be in these big competitions, market your school, perform well. And that's kind of like one side of things. The other two models that I've seen that have done really well are the student life model. It's the idea that you have a large campus or you have a bunch of people on campus who are interested in gaming in some capacity, and it helps engage your student body. It helps, create a community that once they leave that college, those alumni become like very strong and still, keep with the school in some way, and that provides value to the school. So the student life side is like a pretty huge driver for some of the schools that I've talked to who are starting to build out programs. And the third route is through like a specific school that has like an academic program that aligns with gaming in some way. Either that's visual arts, game design, production, whatever else. And I know there are schools, especially something like I believe it's TAMU in Texas, who are kind of starting out different programs, but through the lens of like wanting to make sure that they're like the industry leaders in building out a program for game design, production, and all of that.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of different routes for colleges to take that if you look at them more in aggregate, it's hard to argue against the value of creating some level of competitive gaming programming on campus. I mean, it doesn't have to be like a top tier one. You don't have to go recruit the best players in every program.
Right.
But that's kind of where you can start.
Yeah. Man, that's a great point. Yeah, and I guess the point I was trying to get at earlier too is like, I feel like I guess I see collegiate esports, competitive gaming, whatever, as not needing to be, I think, as big of an investment as say even if you went the athletic route. Like it's not the same level of investment as say basketball, football, whatever.
Yeah.
So
But the challenging thing is obviously people who work at the collegiate and the directorial level, like they need to understand the value, and we need to have people in the space who can speak the language of the collegiate leadership and be able to explain the value of creating the program, sustaining the program, how to build up budgets, how to think about long term. And we're still just not at that point yet.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is made nebulous by the idea that the ecosystem is always in flux. There hasn't been like a consistent rule set. There isn't any governing body. And so these are the things that are going to take time to slowly build out.
We just brought up with having that fandom and having leagues that have been around for hundreds of years, and how just need a little bit more time to generate that alumni network, to generate more fans. I think another part about collegiate that's so fun is the fact that you can establish like a regional identity and have like regional fans where you're seeing that in a league like EU Masters, where you have the German teams that everyone loves, the French teams, the Spanish teams. That's not really the case here in the LCS or in North America, at least. And I think college is the easiest way to kind of accomplish that in some capacity in terms of local fandom, rooting for your school, and things like that. I do want to move on.
We can move on. We didn't plan on talking about collegiate this much, but this was a really great conversation.
We love collegiate, so
yeah.
if you give us the avenue to talk about it, we're going to talk about it. But let's talk about the Path to Pro Combine a little bit, because this is the first one of its kind that SIDO has been running, I believe, at least on an external level like this, where you bring in all of these players. You have this goal of sending 10 players to LA, and then sending 5 of those players to Korea for in-person boot camps on top of these virtual sessions that are happening right now. What was your thought process in terms of creating something like this, and what about it did you want it to be unique in comparison to other combines that have existed, and maybe even some combines that you've run in the past?
So I think for the most part, combines are a way for teams to find like the best players to put on a squad, right? I think my purpose was a little bit different. I kind of wanted to do 4 key initiatives for the space. One was I wanted to revive the value of solo queue in North America. I think for this region to remain competitive, or at least to keep being more competitive, you kind of have to give incentives for players to perform in solo queue. And that's why the entire premise is like, I want to offer value to players to try and solo queue. We basically have like an analytical model that shows not only players' skill level at a given time, but allows us to track their skill level over a period of time across different champions. It also allows us to look at not only their individual skill, but like how much they impact the players around them, both the allies and enemies. And so we just had like a unique position to be able to find good players through solo queue that we not only are good now, but show a lot of potential based on their growth over the year. And that's how I planned, if this program is to continue, that's how I kind of plan to run it is that if there are players who try and solo queue, you're going to be picked up for this program. You're going to be brought onto this combine where you're going to get experience over a course of a few weeks. You're going to get to play games. You're going to get to work with coaches. You're going to get a few seminars on the industry in general. And then the best players from that are going to be invited to an in-person tryout. They'll get to kind of live the pro player life for a week. They're going to get tested on things outside of, just their in-game skill. Both like how motivated they are, how driven they are, how likely and interested they are into going pro. And then out of that, the top players are going to be basically sent to Korea. And the Korean boot camp is going to be also different in that the goal isn't for them to like practice against like teams or anything. It's about how do you, in the best training environment possible, manage your diet, your health, your fitness. How do you create goals for yourself? How do you track them? Essentially giving the best players the most amount of information and knowledge about how to advance their own skill set in the best training environment possible. So for me, I want to basically give a large number of players, like 30 or so players, incentive to play and try and solo queue, and give the best possible players essentially every resource to advance their own careers. So that was kind of like the goal. And we were able to be creative with it just because we're not like specifically looking for any players to join a roster at the given time, but it's possible if, a tier 2 team comes in and be like, hey, we want to potentially like fund this program and pick up players, then I'd be open to it for next year.
Real quick, talk about solo queue being a priority. Any thoughts on Yusin, that top laner that's like 3,000 LP right now or whatever?
Who?
Okay. Maybe not. There's this guy, like whoever's rank one player right now was somebody who was in tier 3.
We've had a lot of conversations about this
player. He's an exchange student.
Yeah.
So he wasn't allowed to continue playing in like the OQs and things like that. But he's really good. He's like he was like really impressive mechanically. I think he's like a student, so he's on like a student visa or something like that. I
see. Do not know this human being.
Yeah, no problem. Anyway,
well, I'm curious. What have there been any standouts to you so far? I know you probably don't want to tip your hand too much, but has there been anyone that's been impressing? Anything like that?
So the way we're doing it is like the first 2 weeks of the combine, we were kind of evaluating players. Tomorrow is. In 2 days, on Friday, we're actually going to announce the first 5 players that are going to make it to the in-person tryouts. So cool. I'm gonna hold off until that.
Okay.
And then the last week is going to be narrowing down the last 5 players. So stay tuned.
I do think this episode is going to go out on Friday. So if you're watching this, make sure you check out SIDO's Twitter and get the grasp on who the first 5 players are.
Yeah. In terms of that solo queue mindset, in terms of selecting people and things like that, it's not. I'm assuming it's not a purely, how high elo you can get. Like, what other characteristics are you looking at? Because I know a player like Bio, who is part of the combine, like he was like a high masters GM player when he was in the OQs this summer. Not necessarily always the highest ranked in solo queue, but there were clearly attributes of his play.
He was literally
we were watching
masters.
him in a summer split that was really impressive to us.
Yeah. So the way our model works is first we look at a spread of champions. Second, we look at their individual. So we basically break it down into 2 categories. We break league down into 2 categories. One is like how good are they collecting resources and how efficiently they can deal damage, right? That goes into your individual stats. But that doesn't necessarily give you the full picture, because in a game of League of Legends, you may make decisions that are worse for your own individual stats, but better for your team, or worse for the enemy, right? So let's say you're a Renekton top. You may choose to give up a wave to go gank the enemy casted mid. In that case, you are losing out on CS and gold, right? But if the enemy mid laner falls behind in that case, you're going to win the game. And so we want to give value to those decisions that are made, right? In the same way, like that same player may, in a team fight, may go in, stun the enemy AD carry. He might instantly die, but now his team is going to, win the fight because that that AD carry is also going to die. And so we wanted to find a different way to do that. And what we found is like maybe the players who are necessarily like know how to win the solo queue game and gain LP. We actually found that that's actually not the thing that makes the most efficient player. And so we were actually able to find MMR ranges below Challenger, even Grandmaster, and find players at even the Master levels that show these traits of not only how to exhibit individual skill, but also know how to take care of the people around them. And these are the players that have the highest potential of going pro, because they see the game in a more multidimensional way than players who are, just playing the game of solo queue in order to climb the ladder.
Very,
And
very
is
well
that all
said.
just by
Yeah.
analyzing VODs, or is that like other statistics that you're looking at?
So yeah, we have a paper that's put out. You can feel free to kind of look at it. It's a very complicated stats model that I don't even think I can describe to you right now in a given period of time. But yeah, for the most part, it's done numerically. So that's where we get like our initial, field of players.
Okay.
And then obviously that's why the combine exists, because just because the numbers say something doesn't mean that they are actually the best, and it gives us an ability to kind of like give those players an opportunity and then narrow them down.
All right. We'll leave it at check out the paper. We can put a link in the description of this video / the podcast, wherever you might be listening. I know we're coming up a little bit on time, so the last question I want to ask regarding the combine itself is, you've talked a lot about like doing new stuff, doing things that have not been done before. We've seen some of these like interesting rules thrown into the combine as well. I assume that's all kind of just a part of it, putting players in situations they may not have been in before.
Sure. So there's multiple things. One is there was like an element of coaching that I wanted to try. I think at the professional level, the way the coaching works is like you play a game, you do a review, and then you kind of go next, right? Yeah, but the reason why it works at the pro level is because most players generally know the game, the rules of the game, they understand what they're doing, and then they can review in post and then kind of apply it after. At the developmental level, players don't even know in many situations what the right move is. Even if they know what the right move is, they don't know how to communicate it. And if they're learning both what to do and how to communicate that and be able to like problem solve in person, those are not all skills that you can teach in post. I genuinely believe that the best way moving forward for the developmental scene is to have experienced coaches in comms with players, kind of leading part of the games until the players are more familiar, and then kind of easing off in the same way that any other, teaching criteria works, right? Like it's split up into drills, little bite-sized pieces, taking the players and slowly, introducing concepts to them. And so I wanted to kind of segment different parts of our combine. I wanted to give coaches a little bit of ability to talk in comms. I wanted them to like focus less on maybe like winning the game and more on other elements. And that's kind of why I designed some of the different exercises. So one example is like the Worlds game. I wanted players who are like less experienced, if they can just go watch the Worlds game that they're assigned beforehand, they can see how the pro players did it. And then instead of, worrying about what the right move is, what to do, they can just execute the thing that they saw before or kind of refine on it. And I think these are like the things that I think are going to push the dev scene forward, not just trying to copy everything the pros do, because that works for the pros, but because they already have a certain level of technical skill and strategic depth already built out.
Yeah, League is like the only game or the only sport where the only way you practice is by just playing games. Like if that was what you did in any other sport, it would just not make sense. Like people, like if a football team like only played football games, like exclusive, like just played football games over and over again. Like it's just such a different concept in terms of practice. And so
and
that's what I found really interesting about.
One other thing we're doing also is that every game we're recording players' comms. We have a Discord bot that we built out for our research, and at the end of the combine, we're going to be able to give players their individual, essentially, comm scores. We'll show them, this is how much you speak when you're playing this champion versus this champion. This is how much you speak when you're in a winning state versus losing state. This is how much you speak when like your teammate has done X versus Y. Because comms is another big part of understanding how the game works, and I feel like developmental players never have an opportunity to kind of learn about themselves until they're kind of given that. So that's another part of what we're doing.
I love that. That is actually maybe the most exciting, like purely developmental aspect that you've talked about. Because when I've heard a ton of like coaches, scouts, whatever, talk about player comms, they're sort of just like, this player has good comms, this player has bad comms. We're working on it. You know what I mean? I love that really targeted thing, because I feel like so many people are really obsessed with like the skill involved, right? But in competitive, for me personally, I think comms are so incredibly important. That's really cool. Okay, well, I think that's basically everything we want to talk about regarding the combine. I think real quick before we let you go, Parth, we do want to talk a little bit about 2025. America's format 2025 specifically. Again, we want to continue on the train of development. We're now, we're sort of moving away from this purely developmental focused league and now moving towards one where winning does matter quite a bit, with, promotion, relegation coming back in some capacity, which actually is, worth mentioning as well. This is the ecosystem that Parth, you came into when you started. So we just wanted to get your thoughts on sort of some of these changes, if you think they're good, they're bad, and what you think the effects will be.
I think that time will tell. I definitely think that it is good in a way that it provides incentive for organizations who want to enter the scene and try like an avenue in. And so I think we will see, maybe not necessarily next year, but like we will see more and more people try, especially as league in North America stabilizes and grows. I don't necessarily like what it's going to do in the short term, which is people who are going to vie for the promotion slot. And I've already had people reach out to me asking how I would build a roster of like the best veterans or leftover players to make this run, right? Like when I heard that, it made me really deeply sad inside. I would actually really, really love to work for like an org who basically takes like newer players and then with the explicit purpose of just like how much can we like make them better by the end, rather than how do we create like the most stable roster of veterans. And so the fourth part of my like program, if a team is stupid or crazy enough to fund me, is I would want to take at least three rookies or younger players who show a lot of potential, and then put them through a program through the course of the year that maximizes how much they improve, rather than how do we try to win every game in front of you. So I haven't been able to find anyone stupid enough to do that yet, but that's kind of my hope.
Well, that's the problem
Org
with
out there.
Yeah, that is true. If you're an org that wants to take that jump, I mean, who
Moist
to reach,
Critical,
but
if you're watching, this is your Just Moist.
he seems like an org that is more on the I'm going to win and try to promote it.
Sure, but it's really funny to talk about the fact that Moist Critical is definitely not watching this podcast. But if he is, there's your idea right there.
Yeah, I mean, creating those strategies is interesting, especially in that might not be as desirable for a team because of the incentive to promote. And so
yeah, I mean it's very counterintuitive, right? Like let's say you pick up like a carry top laner, right? If you're trying to win every game, what you're going to do as a coach is you're going to give this guy counterplay. You're going to have him play. He's going to get to play a strong side. He is going to get everything catered to him in order to win. But what I would want to happen is like if you find like a really good carry top laner who's mechanically talented, he should be forced to do the exact opposite for a long time. Like he should be forced to play weak side. He should learn how to play engage. He should be broadening his champion pool, because the developmental scene is the place you can do that. Once you get to the LCS, you don't have that chance anymore, because that's where you have to win every game. So, and this is my biggest problem with the dev, players from the dev who kind of just rely on their strengths, is that once you get to the LCS, if you're a carry player, you're not going to be able to carry against the best players. And you're also not going to have the skill set to do the opposite. So I'm just hoping more dev programs kind of at least focus on broadening their player skill sets over the course of the year.
Yeah, we did see a team like Blue Otter last year, even though in the NACL winning was a bigger priority because of the international incentives and also the fact that, none of these teams are directly partnered with LCS organizations. We did see teams like that pick up rookies and still find success, whether it was
and I
a
think
slow
it's fair
start
to
at the
say
start
for
of the
teams
split
like Blue
to-
Otter, development
Yeah.
definitely was first as well, as opposed to winning. I mean,
So I
it
hope that-
took them a while
yeah.
to figure out how to win.
I actually really appreciate that org. That's also why when I was reaching out about, partnering with the Combine, I specifically chose them because I feel like they're a positive influence in the space. So
Shout out
I
Blue
really
Otter.
hope that I really hope they continue what they're doing.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Parth. I know we're over on time here, so we're gonna let you go and get ready for this next day of the combine, which is starting in about an hour or so, as we are recording this. But before you go, any last plugs? Where can we find you? Where can we find the work that SIDO's been doing?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you can follow us at SIDO.gg. That's kind of where a lot of our research and things are posted. You can follow us on Twitter. And yeah, just go support your local programs and schools and hit me up if you guys ever need anything or want to do something cool or interesting.
I love it.
All right.
Definitely cool and interesting things happening. Parth, I mean, thank you so much for all of the high-level conversation. This was great. Make sure you also follow Parth himself as well, and make sure that he knows he's appreciated for taking the time here on Salty Runback. We'll toss it back over to the outro. Parth, thanks so much again.
Thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Thank you very much to Parth for sitting down and talking with us. It was a really profound conversation. I feel like we talked about a lot of things that, maybe we weren't expecting to coming in, but
Yeah.
I feel like we always get looped into just like talking about how collegiate is going to save us all. And Parth was very down to have that conversation.
Honestly, it was exactly to me like what an interview should be. We just sort of ended up having a very like high-level conversation with Parth. Very smart guy. I mean, seriously, really cool to get to talk to him. I feel like spoke about a lot of topics that we've spoken about, but like way smarter than both of us combined. So I appreciated that. Anyway, I gotta get to dinner. Happy Halloween, everyone. Follow us on social media at Hawkcast, at Speedy Grapes. Make sure to check out SIDO and Parth. We'll put both their links down in the description. Salty Runback Pod on all platforms. SaltyRunbackPod@gmail.com if you want to work together. We're working on projects for 2025. If you know any brands that might be interested in partnering with the podcast, we are currently in the market. Stay tuned for all the Salty Runback fans out there. It's going to be a big first quarter when the new year drops. But from all of us here, that's the wrong outro. That was my broadcast outro. If you think that Abadaga is the savior of
come on,
NA,
man.
you can take what we said with a grain of salt. I've been Hawk. That's been Grapes. Have a good night, everyone.